What's happening, gang? Back live in the Secret Stash, Real Talk Radio San Diego. My man Steve, Engineer Steve, by the way, always bringing it live in the stash. Appreciate you, brother. And appreciate you guys hanging out with us with Richard L. Boyer, Law Office of Richard Boyer. You can catch him at BoyerLaw.net. Man, the water is officially chummed, Richard. I feel like we opened up that Pandora box of the whole vacation rental thing with the limitations. So many different facets of that conversation. I'm fascinated by it. I know it's a real topical one, too. But much more to get into. And, I mean, if you'll allow me the poetic license, before maybe dig into the next couplet, let's say that somebody comes up to you and says, hey, Rich, what do you do? What would be your response to that?
Well, I like to say that I help people resolve their disputes to start off. And rather than just say I'm a real estate litigator, a lot of people don't know what the heck that means. So helping people resolve their disputes is what I like to say I do and what I think I do and what I try to do. I've been practicing law for over 27 years now, and almost all of it in the areas of construction and real estate.
Hold on, did you just say 27 years?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It belies my true age. But
well, you are a spry veteran then, my man.
Yeah, well, thank you. I won't tell you how old I really am, but thank you. And even before that, I actually worked in construction, which is how I got into construction and real estate law to begin with.
Me as well.
Yeah. So I guess a lot of us broke our teeth, cut our teeth, sorry.
No, it's broke. You had it right. You had it right.
Some of us broke our teeth, too, but cut our teeth in the construction industry and then moved on to other things. But in my case, I moved on to construction law, which naturally just got me into real estate law. So the good thing is I've been doing it long enough now that I've seen so much in this area that I feel like I can a lot of times answer people's questions within a first 15 or 20-minute consultation on the phone. And if I can do that, I'm happy to do it. I don't make people come in and pay me for that kind of advice. If I can resolve their dispute and let them go on their way, making them feel better, then I'm happy to do that.
And that's really cool that you do that. And I want to let that point go unnoticed. Like, that's the antithesis of how most people approach your conversation. Would you not agree?
Yeah, it is. And frankly, it's not completely altruistic. It's good for me, too, because if I don't have to have them come in and spend a half an hour with me in my office, if I can just answer their questions on the phone in a short while, then I'm happy to do that. It's good for both of us. And then I think, it's kind of like a free sample of my work, too. So if they ever need me, then they'll remember me and come back.
Because they'll always probably need you.
Yeah.
At least at one point.
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I always tell them, if I don't hear from you, I'll assume that everything worked out for you. But if you need me, I'm here.
Yeah.
So that's what I try to do. I help people with their real estate issues, but also construction issues and business issues. And issues include things like neighbor disputes over property lines and fences and.
We're going to get into that a little bit later, too. It's one of my questions.
Okay. And there's a lot of issues involving real estate transactions, both on the buyer and seller side. Oh, there's issues involving easements, non-disclosures in those real estate transactions. There are just a variety, which is why I love this work, because there's so much variety, so many different aspects of both real estate and construction law that no day is the same, and no case is the same, no client is the same, and I just can't imagine doing anything else. I love it.
Well said. You get a point. I don't know who's keeping score, but that had to get a point.
Well, thank you.
Hanging out with Richard Boyer, BoyerLaw.net. Here's what's coming up for me, Rich. So, Rick, let's say that I'm hearing you for the first time right now. By the way, speaking of that, you can ask Rick any question live right now by going over to our Twitter handle at Follow the Stash, because we're streaming this whole thing live right now. But let's say someone comes over and says, hey, what would your typical client look like?
Well, I mostly represent individuals and small business owners.
Okay.
The big corporations will go to the big law firms.
Fair enough.
But the small business owners who can't afford the $500 an hour rates of the big firms and the individuals will come to a small firm like me, a small solo or a small firm, and they generally have an issue that is hopefully not a hugely expensive legal issue, but is one that nevertheless needs legal expertise and needs a resolution. So I'll help them get through that. I like to think that I take the stress away from them. I handle that for them, give them some peace of mind, and then we get it resolved in a manner that's satisfactory to them.
Well said. And what a great area to have that be the focus. Because, I mean, man, that's the bread and butter of San Diegans, man.
Yep.
Entrepreneurs, small business,
Yeah. Well, that's true, and the big businesses don't need me. They've got really good representation with some of the real big firms here in town, and also all over the country. But the little people like you and I, and your neighbors and the small business owners around town, they need the small firms and they need the solo practitioners and the personal touch, and that's what we provide.
Well said. So let me get into that thing that I had sort of that thread, I guess, that I had framed from the top. So there's a couple things around fraud that have, let's just say, came into my awareness lately as, I hope they're not trends. But let's say Stash Nation right now is listening in and they're catching for the first time. Let's leave them a little better than how we found them with this. So,
Sure.
So what are like two? Let's just say two for the time we got left in this segment. Two things that you got to look out for to make sure the seller's not frauding you.
Sure, Jesse. Well, I would agree with you. They're not trends, and I still think that they're unusual, but they are usual enough that they come across my desk fairly often. And one is non-disclosures or it's called fraud, a.k.a. fraud. It's intentional non-disclosure by the seller in a real estate transaction. As you know, real estate agents are perfectly capable and do handle most residential real estate transactions in California. And those transactions generally don't need lawyers. But occasionally, either before, during, or after that transaction, the buyer will discover that the seller has not disclosed some important fact. We call them material facts about the property.
What's another word for material facts, just to get us in that?
Something that the buyer would want to know in making his or her decision about buying the property or how much to pay for that property.
Perfectly said.
And it's all kinds of things, but we typically see things like previous water intrusion issues that result in mold.
Get a point for that. Absolutely. Yeah, the big M word, right?
Yeah, mold. That is a big deal. People are, personally, I think people are a little bit more concerned about it than they need to be. As long as it stays in the walls, it's generally not as harmful as when it's out and exposed. But still, it certainly needs to be eradicated. You don't want to leave it there. And it needs to be disclosed if the seller knows about it. That's one. The other thing is we get a lot of subsidence here, which is ground settlement, and that results in cracked slabs and cracked foundations. A lot of times those aren't observable through the reasonable inspection that a buyer is required to do during their transactions, and they don't find
because you can't rip up carpet.
Yeah, you don't take up the carpet, you don't take up the hardwood floors, you don't dig around the foundation. So a lot of times the buyers don't discover that until months or even years after they move in, when they do replace the flooring and they see that there's a crack in the slab that wasn't disclosed, and it was obviously filled with some sort of a caulking solution, so someone knew about it, whether it was the previous seller or somebody else. So we see a lot of that kind of thing. A third, maybe less common.
Ooh, bonus. This is bonus now. I only asked for two.
We're in the bonus time.
Yeah.
A third, maybe less common issue are encroachments. People find out that after they move in that their property line has been encroached upon by a neighboring property owner. So those are the big ones.
Now, here's, I guess, where, if you distill down all of those material facts, as you put it, let's say you get the unfortunate luck that this is happening on your time and dime, right? So there you are. You lift up the carpet because your wife demanding hardwood floors. You pull it up finally. Boom, there it is. It's sitting right in front of you. Someone obviously tried to doctor it at some point in time. Looks kind of fresh. All of your spidey senses are pointing towards the seller because they probably did a flip or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Well, then what?
Well, you have to figure out whether you're going to be able to prove that the seller knew about it. Because if the seller did not know, then they're not obligated to disclose. So that's a lot of times becomes sort of the practical aspect of this non-disclosure issue, whether you can prove that the seller knew. A lot of times it's obvious. The seller had to have known for one reason or another. Because
they put new flooring in or something.
Right. Yeah. And but you get into cases, especially with flippers, where if they haven't lived in the property, if they bought it immediately, did a little sprucing up, put a little facelift on the property, and then turned around and sold it. A lot of times they will not know.
Because they're exempt from the the typical disclosures that a seller would share that information with to make it material, they're exempt from that because they never lived in the property.
Exactly. The bar is much lower for people who didn't live in the property. And that goes for landlords, too. If they only own the property as a rental, they may not know all of the ins and outs that an occupant of the property would know about. So the laws are a little bit relaxed for non-occupant owners when they sell. But still, if they know, they're obligated to disclose. And a lot of times we find that they knew and did not disclose. But so to answer your question, it gets back to one of, how easy is it going to be to prove? One of the things that we find a lot of times when there's been a non-disclosure is those sellers immediately move out of state after selling that property. So that sometimes is a pretty big
canary in the coal mine?
Yeah, that they wanted to get as far away from the jurisdiction as possible to stay out of harm's way.
Going to Mexico.
Well, if sometimes it's just across the state lines, and even that presents some problems, but it's not insurmountable. Hanging out with Rick Boyer, owner, of course, of Law Office of Richard L. Boyer. You can catch him at boyerlaw.net, or you can call him, 858-481-8757. Perhaps you've got one of the vacation rental questions that's sort of on the top or forefront of your mind, or maybe you're in a spot right now where you're either thinking about getting into a real estate transaction or you're already in one, and any of these concepts that we've already discussed today about potential things to look out for fraud, like we talked about mold, subsidence, like potentially could communicate into a cracked slab or even encroachments with the neighbor, he's your guy to call. So once again, that's 858-481-8757. Now, Stash Nation, we're going to take a little break right now. So you're going to get all caught up on some CBS sports commentary. After all, this is ESPN radio, right? Right, Rick? Yes, it is.
Got to get everybody nourished in that capacity. And then on the other side of this break, we'll be right back to talk about what 4 failure to disclose items could kill your purchase deal if you're not too careful about it. Rick Boyer, Real Talk Radio San Diego. We'll be right back.